How many people are walking around that have an addiction that don't know it? That number is closer to 65%. Let's say you've never had anything and all of a sudden you get HPV, you have the throat cancer operation. You have no clue about your addiction risk. Now, you walk in the room, doctor's like looking at you. They don't know really how much opioid they should or shouldn't give you. They're going to give you what they think based on the procedure. All of a sudden have a risk that's up to 25% to become addicted to the opioid after that cancer procedure. It's roughly a 50-50 split between genetics and behaviors and environment. So it's really important to know both.
James, welcome to Decisions That Count.
Thank you for having. Joy to be here.
Amazing. We're in New York.
New York?
Yeah, we're doing a mini series in the US and meeting some amazing people. Had some incredible conversations.
And I'm 3 bagels in, I think.
Nice.
Yeah. And how many slices of pizza?
Yeah. 1 hockey game.
1 hockey game. Went to my first hockey game last night. Amazing. Loved it.
Greatest building in the world, right?
Yeah.
Madison Square Gardens. It was incredible.
That's cool.
So we're here today to talk about the invisible decisions behind addiction. First question. Society often reduces addiction to bad decisions, to a bad decision or a series of bad decisions. What's the science showing us about how much choice we actually have in those moments?
There's a lot of interesting details around that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a framework that we operate by, some science-based, but also just in general. It was eye-opening to me because, growing up in the family of an alcoholic, although I never went into a recovery situation, family members did. And I would say the emotional trauma impact family member of that situation. So it really was a step back for me to look at, well, what is addiction? And why is it something that is pervasive in families over generations and becomes a traumatic impact downstream in generations? There's 3 parts I see to the addiction process or realm. Most people don't really think about this, but 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, there's a little debate between the exact number of folks walking around the United States have an addiction that is documented and they're in some form of recovery. When you think about that, that's only, a small percentage, although it's a large percentage, but it's a smaller percentage of the population. But how many people are walking around that have an addiction that don't know it? Mm. So that number is closer to 65%.
That's insane.
So it's not that you're in a recovery situation or you're in a situation where you have gone through something, but it's those who are like every Sunday, and I use the analogy, every Sunday you're watching a football game in the US, the NFL is a big thing, right? And you're cracking open your drinks, you're having your DraftKings app open on your phone, and you're eating like a pig, right?
America.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying now. I'm just saying.
That's the Canadian.
Yeah. But when you start to put those pieces together and you start to see, okay, there's some really interesting things here that are a problem. And that's where we find a lot of people fall into is that 65%, it could be gambling, it could be, light, heavy drinking on the weekends, whatever it is, vaping. I mean, there's so many things now, unfortunately. There's a much broader category of people walking around that have a problem than not. So I break it into 3 parts. I say there are those who have no clue, there are those who have some clue, and there are those who know for sure, like you're in recovery or you're in and out of a rehab and you have a pretty good clue that there's a problem in your statistic at that point. But the first 2 groups are millions and billions of people. So how do we help people understand how to get in front of this? As opposed to that, the 1 in 4, 1 in 5, that is the result of the problem. That's my life's work and my passion is to figure out the front end of the bus.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. And I couldn't agree more. I think addiction people default to thinking like hard drugs, right? But that's the reality, not the case, is most of it's going to be stuff that you don't realize is happening, right? Yeah, I joke about America. I mean, I see it growing up in Canada. It's hockey instead of football, maybe, but it's the same thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, I really, really like that approach.
Just kind of coming back to that, bad decisions is often we're made to feel like it's us, that you're the one that's making all the bad decisions. But there's actually a lot of external influence and factors that contribute to addiction?
Oh yeah. So that's where we can get a little bit more into the science, I suppose. But and this is not, again, it's not talked about much, and I'm not sure why. But after I was doing my own digging with my co-founder as well, it's roughly a 50-50 split between genetics and behaviors and environment. So 50% of the story is really your genes. So you can get, obviously, that's what we do, covering that part. And then the behaviors is a behavioral analysis that we do as well. You put that together, and that gives you your actual addiction risk score. So all of this is a combination of behaviors and behaviors and genetics that create the addiction outcome. So you can take that and think about that in every way possible, but that's really how the science breaks out. Now, most of us, and myself included, this is how the conversation started in my own head, was, well, if my father was an alcoholic and my grandfather was a gambling addict, genetically, I'm probably going to have a problem. Okay. And I didn't. I have 3 kids. So I'm like, well, does it skip a generation? What is this? Like, what is going on here? So that was really, my curiosity bug kept going off, because I'm like, this is just strange. I'm sitting here 51 years old. I'm not in recovery. I've not had a problem. But my family, historically, through genetics, has had a problem. So what's the deal here? It's not skipping every other generation. I couldn't figure it out. So that's really what intrigued me to go towards trying to solve a problem of understanding it, to get in front of it, because we really don't have a clear, I think just walking around, we just don't have a clear vision of that. But you can see in some people, they'll say, oh, you know what? My father was going to the bar every night. And it doesn't necessarily mean he became an alcoholic. So like, your behavior is going to the bar every night, but you may not have become an alcoholic. Genetically, you might be low, but behaviorally, you're really high. So it's very risky. If you were maybe in a higher genetic predisposition, maybe he would have had shown a real sign much sooner, as opposed to his just, it's like a pattern. So it's interesting how that shapes out with science too, in that 50-50 split.
I've got actually a bunch of questions about this. So first of all, can we just talk a little bit about the genetics? Like, are there specific markers that you're looking for? Like, how do you identify addiction in genetics?
Yeah, like what you guys do. Yeah.
My co-founder of Thrive Genetics is Dr. Danielle Dick. She works specifically for Rutgers Addiction Research Center, which is in New Jersey, right down the street from here in New Brunswick. And we connected because I was a technologist looking to solve this problem, and Dr. Dick had the science in her research lab, and thousands of people have gone through it, clinical studies. And she was working on it for about 10 years. So what essentially she identified was there are clusters of genes that relate to addiction. Then there are behavioral signals that relate to addiction. Those 4 clusters or 5 clusters of genes that relate to addiction, they don't have really definitive markers between like, oh, this person's an opioid addict, and this person's a drug addict, and this person's an alcoholic, and this person's a gambler. And we've all known people who've, come off of maybe alcohol, they become a gambler, and you go, oh, so she's proven that also. So it's not one gene here or there. It's a set of clusters of genes. So it's on the genetic side. But like I said before, it's only 50% of the story. If your behaviors are that of an angel, maybe you would never fall into a problem. So it's really important to know both. So what we do is not to bore you with the science part of it, physicians will work with a patient before they go in to take pain medication to understand their addiction risk. So think about a cancer physician. You have throat cancer. You come in on a Monday and you get your blood work done. You're going to get your genetic test and your behavioral test done. Basically, you spit into a tube. The tube goes to the lab. It analyzes the full genome. On the back end, this is all done underneath inside of our software. On the back end, we go in from an algorithmic perspective and identify the clusters of genes that are related to addiction. And then we take the behavioral, the nurse practitioner does the behavioral, like 25 questions. That immediately goes to the back end, and it's sort of waiting for the gene thing to come in, because it takes about 5 days. And then they're put together, and that combination of the genetic information and the behavioral information gives you the addiction risk score. When you analyze the full genome itself, it's like a 0.5 GWAS test. So basically, pulls it specifically from there. It's not, and some people really drilled into this, it's really not rocket science too much on the back end of that. Really what's interesting, what's proprietary is the algorithm that identifies the patterns. And that's where, Danielle spent most of her time. So that is, a proprietary algorithm that we have that is our secret sauce, if you will, mixed with the combination of the two, because like I said earlier, it's if you don't put the two together, you don't get the result.
No, I love it because I think obviously there's a massive crisis with opioids in the United States, right? And I think sometimes unfairly, like physicians and medical staff get thrown under the bus for prescribing. But the reality, and I have a lot of friends in the space, like they're already underwater, a lot of these doctors. So many patients, so many people, like it's not a physician problem as much as a system problem. So this I love because like our answer to a lot of this is technology. To provide physicians with the information they need to make decisions better, right?
Correct.
So no, I'm just my comment there is like, this is what, it's really exciting to hear what you guys are doing, because this is what we need more of, is to arm these doctors, these nurse practitioners with as much information as we possibly can, because they want to make the right decision.
Right.
And they will if they have the information available.
So you've got the genetics. What was the other one again?
Behavior.
Yep. Okay. Can you just give me some examples of like the types of questions that you might ask in the behaviors? What are you looking for in the behaviors that could indicate a high risk of addiction?
So there's 8 factors, and the 8 factors fall in very, I would say almost like expected places. Like it'll ask you about your childhood experience, and it's like an if-then on the back end. So like if you answer this way, it's going to take you over here. So it's not like you could just copy it and say, oh, we have the questions, we got the data. It's really going to really customize as to how you're answering it. One of the basic ones is at what age did you have or consume any product, alcohol, drugs, or other. And it'll sort of, so that's going to take you, okay, if you said 22 or you said 11, it's going to take you to a different question or a different place. It asks you about your environment. Who did you spend time with? How many of your friends were incarcerated? Not exactly, that's not the right phrase, but if you were in a group of people that were troublesome, it gnaws at that a little bit to get that out, because it really, everything, and it's interesting too when you're raising kids, where you put yourself dictates the outcome of a lot of things, right? The questions that are social, behavioral questions. And then the if-then on the back end allows us to sort of get really to the root of the behavioral problem. But there's 8 high-risk factors. So for instance, if you come in at 2 of 8, it's pretty low. If you come in 5, you're halfway. You come in 8, red flags are going off. So yeah, that's on the behavioral side.
I've got to ask as well, like, is there a potential third? And the third is your exposure to external factors. Okay.
That's environment. So yes is the answer.
Does environment come under the other one? Behavior?
No, you're right. So we tuck that into the behavior. Okay. It's behavior/environment.
Okay. Yeah, because for me, it's like, the types of advertising that you're exposed to, the culture that you're in, the people that you hang out, which you mentioned a minute ago, the people that you hang around with. Like, I just want to probably just kind of clarify that there was never a dependency on alcohol at all, but I did struggle to remove it. And it wasn't because I wanted to drink or I had craving for it, or, it was all external. It was all the external factors. It was I felt like I was letting people down. Everyone in my life drank. Everyone wanted to drink. And that's how we connected. That's how we celebrated, commiserated. That's how we ended the day. I felt like, and I really did a lot of work on this, but deep down, I felt that people wouldn't love me anymore, that my relationship wouldn't be the same with my husband if I gave up alcohol, even though I physically didn't want to drink anymore.
Sadly, this is a lot more common. It's not talked about. It's a lot more common than is giving credit.
You talked at the beginning about those 3 groups of people, the people who are completely oblivious that they have a problem, the people who think they might, or the people who are maybe questioning their relationship with the substance and thinking, this isn't serving me anymore. This isn't making me happy. I'm not enjoying it. I want to give it up. But if I give it up, I'm going to put my whole life, I'm going to turn my whole life on its head.
Right.
Because It's where I hang out. It's my friends. It's my family. It's my social life. It's work. A lot of people have to drink for business. It's like, how is my career how am I going to progress in my career? It's all of these things are wrapped up in that I think a lot of people, and I've come across a lot of people who want to quit, who want to stop, but feel like they can't because of all of these external factors. Let's say
you've never had anything and you've never even had a gambling thing or whatever thing, and you're 29 years old, 35 years old. All of a sudden you get HPV, human papillomavirus, and you have to have throat cancer, right? You have to have a throat cancer operation. You really never partied. You have no clue about your addiction risk. What we're working towards is if a physician can use our tool right up front, they can easily understand if that patient who doesn't even know, and they don't appear, right? So it's all guessing now. You walk in the room, doctor's like looking at you, oh, maybe not. They don't know really how much opioid they should or shouldn't give you. They're going to give you what they think based on the procedure. So if that person has no clue and they're in their early 30s, they didn't really party. Maybe they're just not into that kind of thing. They all of a sudden have a risk that's up to 25% to become addicted to the opioid after that cancer procedure. So having cancer is bad enough. Same thing with spinal neuro, when people break their backs and it's extraordinary high pain. So I always tell people, like, it's not like, oh, I broke my ankle and I have crutches and the doctor gave me oxy. That happens, but it's very, very low. What happens is when you have a very throat cancer, gastrointestinal, bone marrow, any really painful cancer, spinal surgery, any kind of neurological spinal surgeries, these are where you have a very short window of time to repair and recover. 3 months is max. If you can't handle the pain because you deny the meds, that 3 months goes into 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. That just increases your mortality rate at any age. So really, you want to get this right in the beginning, right? So you have the person who maybe has no clue, and they say, all right, you know what? I'll take them. And they have no clue. And then they become a statistic. On the other side, what you get is a very high percentage of people say, I don't want these opioid things. It hurts really bad. I'm not taking them. The doctor says, and I've validated, this has been validated by our customers. The doctor may say, okay, I have to respect your wishes. Procedures on Tuesday. See you Tuesday. Person comes in Tuesday, leaves writhing in pain, goes home, can't swallow, can't sleep, can't turn over in the bed, loses weight, calls, maybe the procedure is Tuesday, they call on Friday and say, this is brutal. I can't take this, but I still don't want the opioid. But the procedure is next Tuesday, but you decide not to come back because you can't handle it. So then you kick the can down the aisle and you go, I'll come back maybe the week after. And you don't want to come back. So then all you're doing is increasing your risk to not heal. So where I see the value of really, and what I'm excited about what we're doing is we're going to help those who are low risk and those are high risk. We're going to help everybody. And we're going to help exactly what you said, John. The physician's going to have a decision support opportunity to be able to make a better call. And then not to oversell the other side of it, but we have a pain management approach for real-time pain management that's on the back end of this. Because when you go home, you're going to communicate back to the physician and the nurse's assistant, the physician's assistant as well. So not to get into the product, but the long tail of it is we're trying to catch it on the front end and manage it on the back end. To keep that procedure within the 3 months, because the hospital systems, the pharmaceutical companies, there's all these costs that just start to add up. There's mortality rates increase when you get past this 3 month period, or 2.5 months really is what it is.
I think there's a couple super important points that like maybe people don't realize is like pain management isn't a nice to have. It's actually an important part of healing. And I think sometimes people forget that like pain management is just nice, but no, it's really, really important to make sure our body doesn't, respond inappropriately to what just happened to it. And yeah, like I reiterated already, I think more information for doctors is better. I think what people need to understand, those medicine works on probabilities, right? It's never a black and white question. It's about understanding risk. Like when you go for surgery, they'll say, oh, there's an X percentage chance that things will go wrong, right? That's how medicine works. And same with this, at least a doctor can have a probability scale to explain to a patient saying, look, you're predisposed to this or not, or whatever. Like you said, you're helping both the low risk and the high risk and understand it. And then the last point, so it goes quite a ways back, but everything we've discussed today or so far, how important your social group is to your behavior. And you mentioned something a little off like the cuff about parenting. And I know it's not what the conversation today, but it just highlights for parents how important it is to track the social groups of your kids, because they have such a major impact on their life and their behavior, from addiction to how they value school and everything else. Like that social group to, work and how tough to get out of it. So yeah, really interesting listening to all that. But I think those are 3 points so far that are really valuable to pull out.
One thing that just about the pain management as well is that you can go to you were talking about kind of the end of the spectrum where it's people just don't want to take it. There is that fear. And we had a family member who we sadly lost to cancer. And, even though it was an end of life situation, right, he just didn't want to take the morphine because even though there was like a lot of pain, because he'd never taken a drug in his life and associated morphine with, heroin addicts but it was like, I think worried that he was going to become dependent or addicted to it, but it was end of life.
Right.
It didn't matter, and I think it's really, really interesting to just have this conversation to, actually this is going to, okay, that's a very different situation, but, in a lot of cases, this is going to accelerate your healing. And there are ways of being able to understanding the risks, but there are ways with pain management and to be able to take this as safely as possible for your level of addiction risk.
With that situation of the person you're referring to, what if they were able to understand that they were right or wrong? So your family member says, I just don't want to become addicted, even though they might be end of life. If you could reassure that person, let's say you just play both scenarios, you're actually a low risk. It's a confidence and comfort at the end of life. It's just one more positive flow of energy, which we didn't get into the depth of soul and resonance and all this deep stuff I love to talk about. But what if you're able to give somebody that positive flow of love and feel and emotion? I didn't think about this till you just said this. And on the other side, let's say they are high risk. And you say, you were right. Just want you to know that. And it's the same, oxytocin. It's like data becomes so important to how we feel about ourselves all the time. And my wife jokes, she's like, you're such a data nerd. I said, I think it's kind of like a thing for me. It's like, I think it kind of closes the loop for me on some things in life, because I'm like the curiosity killed the cat. I've been dead 1,000 times, but, I never thought of it to this degree of palliative care. Like maybe we can make a difference in people's lives in a way that's, emotional. Never thought of that.
Yeah, I think that would have given him a little bit of peace, and maybe he would have found a bit more comfort in the pain relief earlier.
And the caregivers, I would say, because quite often in end-of-life care, like dementia patients and things like that, so many of those tough decisions are left to the loved one.
Yeah.
My father's deep in Alzheimer's disease, and the stress it puts on the caregiver is, like my mom, is immense. And you quite often see the caregivers will degrade faster than the people with Alzheimer's, right?
Right.
A big component of that is decision-making. And data, I totally agree with you, is because, what we weren't told growing up is like life is scary and we don't really know what's going on. Right.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
A big myth is that we're in control all the time. But what data does, it does give you great confidence in decision making. And there's no more important decision than your loved one. And it's a very scary decision when all of a sudden you're responsible for their health, right? So any type of data like that, even if, like you said, it's the high risk side, it allows people to make a very confident emotional decision and feel better about it, whether it's the patient or a caregiver.
We actually had somebody mention this to me. So our market is specific to right now supporting this oncology and spinal in these high pain scenarios. but it can apply everywhere, unfortunately, which makes the market part of this complicated. But one other area you just mentioned that did come up when people are in treatment centers, a lot of times they'll say, no, I'm not, I've been here 14 times, I know, but I'm not an alcoholic. And I had a few people tell me that this would be very useful for them to actually have a data point to say to the person who's been in 14 times, look, you've been in the rehab 14 times. I just want you to know, here's the data that does show genetically and behaviorally that you are an alcoholic or an addict or whatever it is, right? You have an addiction risk that's high. And it's not your fault. That's the other thing. We didn't really touch upon that. It's like, if it's a disease, it's a disease. It's proven it's a disease.
Yeah.
This goes back to your first question, Michelle. That sort of myth of like how people view this problem. And since I've been in this role, CEO of running this company, and I have had to connect with people in every industry, I can't tell you how many CEOs are super, super successful that I look up to, that I've called and said, can you help me? And they're like, absolutely. And I'm like, well, why does this person say they're absolutely willing to help me? And maybe some others don't, is I come to find out they're in recovery or they're in some form of recovery. And the myth of, I don't know if the right word is myth, but the overhanging cloud has started to disappear. So people will say, I'm in recovery now. And they're like, wow, that's, this so-and-so's, super successful, this or that. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a jockey, it could be a CEO, it could be a hockey player or whatever, right? And you go, wow, that person's in recovery. That's interesting, but no one wants to talk about it because it's, it's a taboo thing in the past. But that cloud is disappearing as people start to really open up about it. But it's shocking to me, to go back to your very first question, sorry, how many people still worry about that, they worry about their brand and stuff like that. Like you said, Shawn, the data is very critical to really helping people understand how to manage themselves. I mean, this is all we're doing now in every other field anyway. Why is it different in this one?
I should say, it's so funny that you say that because depending on who I'm talking to, sometimes I'll say, oh, I'm 3.5 years sober, or I'm 3.5 years alcohol free. And then I'll kind of tend to always qualify it by going, oh, but I wasn't dependent, and like I explained earlier about kind of, it was more of I felt like I was letting everyone down. There was a deeper psychological thing behind it. But then there is probably a part of me that's like, I'd love to know, okay, what was my addiction risk? Having this conversation makes me question it. It's I wonder if I'm high risk, if I'm high risk. And then maybe now, am I in recovery, or have I just chosen not to drink because I don't fit the stereotype of an alcoholic? And also just on the addiction side is I am addicted to running. I've definitely got a sugar addiction, okay, we could talk about other things, but if I've got that predisposition to addiction, maybe now I've channeled that into more healthier avenues.
Right.
I don't know. It's just making me think.
There's a lot to what you just said. Smoking is interesting. There's, and this, I'm not an expert on this at all, but from what I know, there's a lot more with smoking and cessation and different things related to that. And I will say, to compliment my co-founder, Dr. Danielle Dick, if you want to look up my co-founder, she has done some work in that area and has peers that have done a lot of work in that area. So the cessation aspect and then the addiction aspect, it's like sister cousins, if you will. They're not actually in the same bucket. They're in, I think, different buckets, but they're certainly like, Bonnie and Clyde, if you will, right? That's one thing. And I think the concept that you're talking about with like all of this coming together is it's where you start to pull apart, your personality of who you were and who you want to be. And if you're just like, okay, I want to really focus on running or focus on these other things, it might not be the addiction. It just might be your safe, happy place to go that satisfies something and not necessarily related to anything malevolent or whatever the right word is. So sugar, although does show in addiction, propensity. That's a different conversation. But I think like running and people are workaholics or different things like this, sometimes does come out, but it's more on the epigenetic.
Yeah, I think to your original point, like going back to data and how, like, if you're a recovering alcoholic, to understand that you had a propensity or a higher likelihood based on your genetics, it really helps to tackle the issue. Because one thing good about like our generation and the youngers who are way better than us at this is like they're breaking all the stigmas around it, right? Like I remember when my 3 of my 4 grandparents had some type of dementia or Alzheimer's, and they try to hide it. It was like a stigma to have that disease, right? Which is clearly not a personal failing. It's a physiological reality.
Right.
But so often we see it as a personal failing, which I'm not trying to take away consequences of decision making. Like you're still making decisions which are important. But I think people need to understand that a lot of these conditions can be derived from biology or physiology. So if you know that you're a high risk, well, you're fighting an uphill battle, which can be actually motivating for some people to be like, all right, I need to be extra careful. And I know it's not my personal failing. It's just a genetic or physiological part of me. And I think that applies across a lot of different things when people, long story short, people are very hard on themselves, personal failings, when a lot of it can be attributed to biology, or like we talked about, your upbringing, things like that, even epigenetic factors. That doesn't excuse behavior, but I think people are way too tough on their decisions. And data can help that.
You had done an episode I saw on the gut biome, and I think that is the next frontier to a lot of these concerns and issues. And head trauma is a massive, massive gateway to a lot of complexity and problems. So one of the things we found out about my father was when he was 18 or 17, he was in a traumatic car accident, and he was in a coma. He had traumatic brain injuries that were like devastating. Back then it was like, I got a headache, go back to work, but he was like in a coma for a while. And we go, oh, so you add that to the sauce and you go, okay. So then keep going with that train of thought and you go, okay, what does the NFL look like? What does the NHL look like? What does the NBA look like? Even soccer, American soccer, football, European.
Yeah.
A lot of traumatic brain injuries. And you start to really put that together and you say, oh, there's a lot of suicides coming through this process of head trauma and pills or alcohol. And you really start to, drill down on that and you go, wow, that's a very big area for us to be able to also help if you think about it, because how many students are going from high school to college and then from college to the pros? There's a lot of people that have a lot of head trauma from sports that it just goes by the wayside. It was a little bit of a thing for a while in the NHL because so many players were actually having issues. The speed of the game, and there was a lot of focus on it. A lot of people were doing stuff about it, and then it sort of got quiet because the players changed their style of play. But and that's just one league. But head trauma is a big put gas on a fire when it comes to addiction, as is the microbiome. But that's kind of an up and coming thing. But you had a guest on, I think, really an interesting, totally for me, nerd out on that. I love the gut biome conversations because I just think there's so much going on there. I biohack all the time. I'm not going to lie. I love the data.
I was about to say, me and you are going to be friends. I like the data, the biohacking. I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm like, let me figure this one out. And again, not to keep going there, but I think my father's situation had a gut biome thing. I'm not going to go there. It's whatever. It's more personal, but I think he had some complexities there, and they're tying that back to alcohol abuse in patients. Now, this is not anything we're doing, at least in our company. But there's a lot of connections. And you go, well, that's really interesting. It's like how you process alcohol in your digestive system, if you will, creates a different experience for you than it would for you or for me. Like we could all do the same, and let's say we all have the same genes, or brother and sister or twins or something, then your gut biomes are different. So let's say twins, you're going to get a different result, which is just fascinating. And I'm probably the wrong person to talk about that, but it just intrigues me because of the data, what we're seeing.
No, when it comes to head injuries, right, in sport, I think the data is like, as much as I can say this, irrefutable for later conditions like dementia or suicide risk. The only problem is there's obviously a massive industrial complex behind sport, right? NFL, NHL. You're talking about some of the biggest, most powerful things out there. UFC, right? But
right, yeah.
So all to say that, like, not that I'm not saying they're evil or anything, but like, if there was a way, I just don't think they're going to stop. We're not going to turn down and stop the NFL because we recognize that it's not good for players. That being said, if there was a mechanism, again, more data to be like, oh, wait, you're 2 seasons in and actually your risk, your propensity has changed dramatically, right? From behavior, whatever analysis we can possibly do, maybe it's added to gut microbiome. At least those players can go in with more conscious knowledge of what they're doing to themselves, right? And that's the thing I think we should try to strive towards, is that we have these sports, but then we're more aware, the players are more aware of what they're tackling. The biome is less clear cut for sure. So, I mean, there's more bacteria cells in your body than human cells, right? Like you can argue that humans are just like sacks to carry around the bacteria, right?
It's probably true.
And those questions are so difficult because societies, our nutrition, everything has changed so quickly over the last number of years that we're seeing a complete redesign of our entire gut microbiome, right?
Yeah.
So, and then add into that things like microplastics in the blood. So you can't find any human blood on the planet right now that doesn't have it in the blood, right? Which we don't know how that impacts us at all, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But we also had leaded gasoline once. There's a layer of lead across the planet from when we had leaded gasoline for a few years. So it's not the first time humans have done some shitty things that after we're like, oh, wait. So,
bad move.
I'd just like to switch gears a little bit and just talk a little bit about how decision fatigue might hinder people who are trying to make behavioral changes or who might be struggling with addiction. So, Shawn, I'm going to shoot that to you, and then maybe we could get some context from James.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it goes back to the thing that there's physiological things that can happen in our brain that affects our decision-making capacities. And people don't need to be so hard on themselves. And one of the things that fascinated my research the past number of years is decision fatigue. So for those, I mean, if you're watching this podcast, you've probably heard us describe it before. New listeners, I'll go quick. So essentially, we're thinking there's 2 types of fatigue in the brain. There's mental fatigue, feeling tired, have a cup of coffee, have a can of Red Bull or whatever other energy drink to increase your wakefulness. The other type of fatigue is decision fatigue, or basically the quality of your decisions declines the more decisions you make or emotionally engaged those decisions are. It's very context dependent. So you can make 10,000 decisions at work and you're fine. Then you make 100 decisions, with your older daughter about what Uber she's taking or not, and you get decision fatigue fast because it's emotional and draining, right? The thing about decision fatigue is it's physiological. So this limit we hit for information processing or capacity is physical. And once you hit that limit, your brain starts to do one of 2 things. So you avoid decisions entirely. You say, I'm not making any more decisions, right? So scrolling endlessly through Netflix, you just can't decide what to watch. Or it's default decision making. So this is when you'll default to something that's the safest, it's easiest, or conversely, a reckless decision. So it can be kind of one of those things. So to the question around addiction, and it's a fascinating question, I don't have the answer for it, and love to hear your thoughts on it with all you guys' work you're doing, is resisting things. So if you have decision fatigue, long day of work, what's the default safe decision if you're trying to recover, right? It may be to reach for that can of beer or whatever, right? Like you may be defaulting and it's physiological. Your brain is just at its limit from decisions and it just wants to make the easiest decision. So in regards to addiction, I think it's a fascinating subject to explore because you're doing the genetics, which is very important, the behavior history, which is super important. But now there's like this interday challenges that these recovering people face every day. And maybe it's one of that pain management component, the long tail you were describing.
So I hadn't really thought too much about this before I saw, what you guys were working on. And I thought about it. I think there's a little bit of a gap in the answer to this because I really looked into it and I thought about it. I said, in really what we're even doing, there's not in my experience, there's not a direct set of science that we can look at around this, but there's also not a clear dotted line that anyone studied it. Everything you just actually went through, I won't repeat it, but when you go for the end of the day and you go for that drink, is that a pattern? Is it a comfort? Is that, what is that? What is that decision fatigue moment? Is there one? Or is it like the runner's urge where you're like, I have this urge and it's a craving, right? That I don't have any clear direct path on that. But as you're talking about decision fatigue, I thought about, have you seen Chris Voss, the negotiation guy? He does a lot of little snippets about, he's like, don't call me after, don't set a meeting after 2 p.m. Eastern, I guess, or whatever, because of this exact reason. It's like, it's either yes or no decision. Don't start laying on top of these various things. And I think that lends itself, when you get to that point, to making poor decisions, whether it's driving or crashing into something or picking up a drink or having that extra pill. I find there's like a gap there.
I feel like it almost lowers your willpower in a way, because if you are working a program and you're on your way home from work and you've got decision fatigue and you just decide to swing by, that if your habit's always been, I'm going to swing by the bar on the way home, your defenses are down, like you're suffering from decision fatigue, your brain is going to default to a habit or to what was done previously or what it knows almost. Right. It's going to be much harder for you to break a pattern, break a habit when you are in a compromised cognitive state like decision fatigue. I've explained that correctly then, haven't I?
Yeah. No, and you're totally right, like this gap in the science, because there is. Because honestly, like 15 years ago, we didn't need to talk about decision fatigue. Decision fatigue wasn't an issue for your average person. Certainly for our parents, we never even needed to think about decision fatigue. They were making hundreds of decisions a day. Now we're making something like 35,000 decisions every day, your average person. And that's cool. Like, this is why I love the science part, is actually decision fatigue, if it is what we think it is, and not just we, like there are scientists obviously beyond us who are pursuing it, it's a problem of modern society. Scroll your socials for an hour. How many decisions are you making? To swipe, to like, to share? And the thing about socials too is everything that they show you is designed to keep you on the platform. How do they do that? By they make it emotionally engaging. It's not boring content, right? Like it's not watching TV where you're a passenger on the bus. You're driving the bus through social, right? So yeah, there is this gap. And this is the exciting part of science, especially from the neuro side, is like, this is something that's hasn't really been thought of because we never needed to before.
Well, it's good there's a gap, because I couldn't find much.
Yeah, no,
I wasn't missing something. I got you.
No, there's probably a dozen, maybe half a dozen publications around this. In extreme circumstances, we've known about this. So like soldiers in combat, like there has been research done looking at like decision fatigue in very specific situations, high performing athletes, like in tennis, F1, things like that. Now data is emerging. COVID was a catalyst for it, actually, because in the healthcare industry, doctors and nurses were making bad decisions. But like they looked at the data and they're like, well, why? They weren't really tired. It was the stress of COVID. Every decision they were making, they were thinking, am I going to get infected? What's the rates of death? Am I going to take this to my family? It caused them to suffer from decision fatigue much, much quicker. Yeah. So that was one of the catalysts. COVID was a catalyst to expose this issue in the healthcare industry. Since then, it's gone to finance. We know the loan application officers, financial analysts. So it's broadening the scope now. Yeah. Like one thing I'll guarantee is 5 years from now, like everybody will know about decision fatigue. Everybody will. It's going to be such a hot topic to discuss.
James, it was so great coming on the podcast. I've got one more question before we go.
Is time up?
It is, yeah.
What?
We've been an hour. It's gone quick.
Ah, okay.
James, if you could leave our listeners with one thought, whether in the context, but maybe one thought about decisions, maybe in the context of addiction or trauma or daily fatigue, what would it be?
In the world that I'm in, and as it pertains to what we just talked about, I think it's more about taking a step back when it comes to addiction and you're going through that process, there's those 3 parts we talked about, whether it's like you have an active problem, you may have a problem, or you don't know. A big part of it is just understanding yourself and your habits, and the behaviors being, I think, the key driver to unlock the genetic complexity. So like if you're going through making certain decisions each day, and even large decisions like I want to live here, I want to live in New York City versus I want to live on a farm, it's going to make a big difference. Those types of decisions, and it probably is decision fatigue when you're trying to make bigger decisions, to not choose the wrong path, because the genetics can be unlocked by the epigenetic, and that's where the problem surfaces. So the decision fatigue will be a problem if you're not clear on your behavioral intentions. So I think the one thing to take away is really think about your daily actions and behaviors. And if you can even write them down to a degree where you can trend them, back to the data. If you can trend and see how you're doing, you'll notice patterns, which will then create less decision fatigue. My analogy to that is the Steve Jobs effect, which is wear the same t-shirt and same pants every day.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in your life and your behaviors, if you can chunk out like, okay, my schedule is like this, my patterns are like this. Let's get it down to something more streamlined. Let's say you worked in this office, we're in Manhattan, and you live down the street. There's 13 bars between here and your house, and it's really easy to just roll right in. So if you're creating a lifestyle where you say, all right, I'm going to go to work out at 5:00. When I get done, I'm not going to go to Joe's bar. But if you're trending and tracking it, you're going to see like what you're doing, what you're not doing. So chunk it out behaviorally. To me, my 2 cents would be to chunk out your behaviors and really think through those patterns, recognize those patterns and create better patterns. That will create less decision fatigue downstream. And I think it will create a happier person long-term.
I think that's great. I mean, a big mission of this podcast is just make people aware of the power of their decisions. Because quite often we leap to action and we don't think about the decision process before. Which, distilling kind of what you said there, is just really being intentional about those decisions and seeing where they chunk out in your life, where they trend.
I think it's not just about being aware, it's about having as much data as you can. And a lot of people, I'm literally kind of like double banding here between kind of Whoop and Apple. Like I am a big data person, every test under the sun, I just take my money. But having that data and I inform so many, it informs everything for me now. Like, all my decisions are data backed and they're thought through, and obviously I go with a lot of how I feel and everything else, but data plays a big part.
And I like writing it down. As simple as that. Just write it down. Yeah. If you can. Yeah.
James, thank you so much for coming on Decisions That Count. It's been great talking to you today, and the work is fascinating and just needed as well. So I think it's just brilliant work. Congratulations on the company and everything you're doing. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a fun conversation. I enjoyed every minute.
And to all of our listeners, watchers, listeners or viewers, wherever you are, we'll link to all of kind of James's profiles below. Take a look. If you've got any questions, jump on, ask us. We love hearing from you. And as always, make every decision count. And we'll see you next week. Bye.